Hello and welcome to the A-Form Show. My name is Alan George.
And my name is Tisha Rao.
Each week, we sit across from thought leaders and change makers in the architecture and design space of the GCC.
We dive deep into their professional and personal experiences to find out what makes them really tick.
Our goal is to add value to your day and make you all much better architects and designers overall.
Finally, the views and opinions of the guests do not necessarily represent the A-Form Show.
Hello and welcome to the A-Form Show. Today we have the awesome Varsha Vasant with us. She is an architect with over 6 years of experience in the industry of Dubai. She is recognized for her contributions to projects professionally and for her enthusiasm and passion, but also for her soft skills contributing to the team's success. She thrives in think tanks and collaborative environments. Her life experience has helped her in keeping a calm and resilient nature in times of stress. We are definitely going to test that today. She is consistently driven by every opportunity to learn and grow, and believes this is the mindset that has to be exercised into being. Varsha can be loosely described as a jack of all trades, someone who is open and willing to explore new things constantly. She drives passionately head deep into just about anything she's doing, whether it be about architecture, design, art, music, or movies. We have a lot to unpack in this episode, clearly. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Varsha.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Welcome, Tisha.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is cool now. We have a co-host.
Yeah.
I feel like the pressure is slightly off me, but more on me in a very weird way. Strange.
It's shared now.
It's shared.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start off with when we were doing research about your profile. It seems that you have been through a lot of internships, which I find quite strange for people over here. Normally, people do an internship as just because I have to, it's part of my requirement to graduate and things like that. But I feel like you have gone out of your way to genuinely do internships in what seems like various companies with various portfolios.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes. I mean, it was kind of hard initially to just find a job off the bat. Like the first two internships I've done, yes, they were part of the coursework that I had in university. But beyond that, I did get to work in this one place where being a free intern, you're there, but also being a free intern, you don't necessarily have to do grunt work. You get to learn a lot more. And in that particular place was the first time I got to work in concept design. So that was kind of exciting. And also like I worked with someone I knew, and professionally, they did actually introduce me to some ideas that have helped over time. Like, for example, it's really minor, but like coming from intern that wasn't being paid at that particular internship, he was just like, I know you're good at A, B, C, D, but you want to do A, B, C a lot more than you want to do D. So when someone asks you, are you good at D? You can say, yeah, but you don't have to brag about how good you are.
All right, so the learning was what? Don't brag about how good you are?
No, focus more on the things that you want to do, basically.
Yeah. Right.
Put all your efforts into those kind of things. So that was pretty valuable, and it has helped shaped my career to where I am now. It's really helped me get to a place where I'm doing things that I genuinely really enjoy doing. It's like a treat every day to come into work because you get to do exactly what you want to do. Because
you learned that, do you think that's something which you're consciously working towards, that you want to be doing work like that only because now you know what you want to be doing?
The thing is, I have had experiences in different parts of the whole industry. Like I worked in a construction site at one point of time. I've worked in detail design. I worked in schematic, and concepts are just genuinely a lot of fun. I did get to focus a lot more on that in the last few years, but it's quite valuable knowing everything that you do. Like at least early on, you can't specifically fixate on something. You kind of have to become a Swiss Army person, like a Swiss Army knife, but like, just learn a lot of things. But then I think as you progress over time, it helps you later on, I think, kind of grow in the way that you want to grow.
Okay. Interesting.
And do you think this kind of experience is something that helped supplemented your education? Like if you had just done, let's say, your certificate course or your program and then gotten directly into a job, do you think your internships kind of helped you bridge that gap between what academic architecture looks like and what it looks like professionally?
Absolutely. I mean, I think variety is generally what's very eye-opening because you get to really see how different places work, how different people think, and you get to really learn from a variety of different environments. And all these things come into play. Like when I worked in a construction site, I wasn't in like inspections or anything like that. I used to work on BIM drawings. And this was like at LOD 400 stage drawings. So this was like, we made drawings that were fixing drawings that consultants give. And like, this is way back when. And we would give this directly to the construction worker. So I learned a lot about like actual construction, like things that architects don't pay too much attention to, like the groove that's there between tiles. It's like 2 mm or 1 mm, and you don't account for that. And you think that, you'll have a nice pattern on the ground, but you lay tiles out in a room, and at the end, you're going to have a bit of it that just kind of are odd, and you'd have to, So these are small, really minor things that it's way too much detail to get into as a consultant, but these were like fun facts that I had to encounter later on.
No, I mean, to be honest, is something which I think every architect keeps learning throughout their career. I don't think there's any point where an architect can sit back and say, oh, you know what? I think I know it now.
Yeah.
I think, obviously, I would imagine the learning curve when you just start off is very high. I can imagine. And of course, the more you do it, that curve becomes a little more shallow as you go on with time. But definitely, I think starting off at site is ideally best, to be honest. Do you think that it's because you've done that first and now focused on concepts? Do you think your concepts are a bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A bit more mature than just, kind of just designing anything and however?
I mean, if you're young and getting into this very young, it gives you a lot of experience in thinking about materiality and how things work, I think. I mean, obviously, with more experience, you learn these things eventually. But then most fresh graduates, they work directly in a design office. And that's all of their experience, like straight off the bat. And they I think that was the one big advantage it helped me with. And also like it generally improved my technical skills quite a bit. And it was also somehow helped my work ethics because, those things were very fast paced as well.
Right.
So I think when you're young, something like that gives you, when you're fresh off as a graduate, things like that, I think definitely help.
Interesting.
Just to expedite that whole learning curve. You would learn it eventually, but something like that kind of helps early on, I think.
Right. Okay. So since you touched upon the topic of fresh grads, and maybe this is something which Tisha can also take the lead on, the big question, one of the major reasons I wanted to have you on the show. With every guest that we have, we normally talk about how, okay, this could be done at an education level. This could be done at a mid-level. This is sort of where, when we're hiring for young graduates, this is what we look for. This is where they lack, and so on and so forth. It's always kind of like from a top-down viewpoint. But in your case, I would want to know from you directly, because you have seen fresh grad experience here in Dubai. What was your kind of, I don't know what the word is, like I'm thinking expectations, of course. I'm sure your expectations were different or maybe higher or lower, whatever they may be. But what was your overall experience as a fresh grad here in Dubai? What did you think it was going to be and what was it finally?
To be honest, I didn't know how it would be exactly because I studied in India and then I came out here kind of as a complete blank slate. I didn't know how things worked out here, and things work very differently in India.
Yeah.
And it became more of like all of my work experience has been in Dubai. But the fact that I did my internships, which were part of the course here and went back, we actually had like vivas based on it. And they would ask us questions on like what we've learned over the internships and stuff. And that's where I found, like, I can't really speak for my expectations, but I found a huge difference between what I learned here in Dubai versus what my classmates learned working in India.
Could you care to give us an example?
So one of the biggest things was just technology. At that point of time, a lot of people were still in India. They were still very heavily on college with 200 pages of work that I had done, whereas somebody else in 4 months had like 25 pages of like drawings that they had worked on. They couldn't understand how I had 200 because Revit just is that much faster. And then I literally got into an argument at the Viva because the professors were very old school, which I actually do appreciate about my coursework because of how old school it was. I feel like I got a lot of, I know I'm pivoting here, but like I feel like I got a lot of old school methods of design thinking, which is more with your hands and like, versus students out here, they kind of rely a lot on technology. which is good in some ways, that you really learn how to think in 3D and make stuff in 3D. But there is some kind of a charm with playing with things with your hands and like, all of that. But on the flip side of that, a lot of them were very old school, and they immediately had a bias against me. They're like, oh, you went to Dubai? Okay. And he's flipping through the thing. And then they
why Dubai gets hated on so much by everyone. They
overly grilled me, and then they couldn't understand how, Revit exactly could achieve some things. And, it got frustrating to kind of explain it to them. And then but I think that was one major thing that I noticed about being a fresh graduate and working here. It's a lot more modern, I guess.
Okay. Yeah.
The thinking is a lot more fresh.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That was a similar experience for me too, because I've done internships here and I've also worked in India as well. And I remember like when I began at my workplace, like my job, there were a lot of things that seemed unfortunately very backward that I had to kind of rewind and be like, okay, fine, this is how it's going to be. And this is kind of what I need to adapt to. And for me also, like coming from, like studying in the US and then also working here, you feel a sense of professionalism even in the workplace, which you get trained to kind of imbibe and kind of showcase. But then when you go back to India, it's kind of like they think you're too uptight because you're professional. So it's like these, even personality wise and the way you're perceived in the workplace can really vary based on, what your prior training has been as well, I feel.
Okay, but then let me ask the very then obvious question, right? If clearly the both of you saw that certain practices were, I wouldn't say backward, but maybe dated. They just haven't been updated since, right? If they were, have any of you ever brought this up with whoever it is you're working with? And if so, what was the kind of reaction? We can start with Varsha.
So I've never worked in India, so I can't really speak for that. But I think I've come close to convincing 3 or 4 classmates of mine completely into what Revit is. Like I knew a guy, he was a classmate of mine who worked with an architect who did all his drawings, not even on CAD, but by hand. Okay? Wow. It was very impressive because he's getting a completely different kind of experience. Yeah. And I had this really long conversation with him, just learning how he did things and how it was a very small practice, but he did so much of work. And then I went into explaining how something like Revit works and how it can genuinely help him. I dropped about 10 to 20 voice notes and we were talking for 2 hours, and I was just getting into it because at that point I was really energized by Revit, and I was like, oh, this is fun. This is challenging because it's in that upward learning curve where you're kind of good with it, but you haven't learned everything yet. But so it's kind of exciting. So I feel like I have convinced fellow ex-classmates about these kind of things, but I have not worked in a place to be able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
From what I've understood, sometimes it's an affordability thing. So people want to imbibe Revit, but then or adopt Revit into their work. But sometimes it comes down to, okay, number one, how many other people in the industry locally actually know Revit and can use Revit. And so if we're going to pay, let's say, an X amount of money to get this, what's really the benefit that's going to happen? Because in the end, you have to kind of work on industry standards. And in India, especially, you're not only working with, let's say, a private client. Majority of the times you're working with government. If they need files, things like that, just how transferable are files and, anything of that sort amongst different types of people, that plays a very important role. So sometimes I've seen it as affordability being one. And then secondly, let's just stick to what the majority are using because that makes our work easier.
Yeah. Right. And also I feel like it's a training costs as well. They
exactly.
And people are kind of been there for a while and you're just comfortable with what you know.
Right.
They're not ready to move outside of the comfort zone.
Right. And especially with students, I think let's say for me in the US, a lot of my softwares are actually provided by the university. So I don't have to really worry about the cost as a student. But then in India, it's not the same where you have to get, your own Adobe suite. And a lot of softwares, you're kind of taking on that extra burden, which sometimes I feel like can also be an obstacle in actually keeping up with what's relevant.
Right.
Internationally.
Right. So if Autodesk, you're listening in for some reason to this podcast, you have a major market you can cover right now. You're welcome. No, but all jokes aside, I think I have seen this firsthand. Again, I've not worked in India, but I've done quite a bunch of work with people over there. And you're absolutely right. It's very similar things, even down to, the CAD file you send doesn't have the right pen set, which we use. And that's a problem. So yes, I understand that can be an issue. I wish it wasn't. But on the flip side, I feel like I've also met people who are the exact other extreme, who kind of go down the route of, coding their own script for parametric stuff, that level, like the absolute other end of the spectrum as well. So is that something which you've come across, or was that just like a one-off thing?
You mean in India?
In India, yeah.
Oh, yes. Nowadays, yes. But my fresh grad experience back like in 2015, not so much back then. But
right.
Yes, now a lot of people are adapting to stuff. It's surprised me about how futuristic it's gotten in India, especially like since demonetization. After that, like people adopted technology just because physical money wasn't available. So even the poorest of the poor adopted these kind of things. And then just going to India and seeing places like Jaga and stuff, it's a collaborative workspace design hub. You can, rent it out. You just go to their website and see the kind of events that are happening over there. These hackathons, these things that are just, like really future thinking ideas that people are coming together and really exploring right now.
Yep.
It's quite exciting to see that things like that happen in India.
Digital inclusion is actually being considered as now almost a human right. Like a lot of people in India are kind of fighting for, internet to become like a basic necessity, and how do you make it even more accessible than what it was. So it really has a lot of potential kind of moving forward.
Yeah,
I feel.
For sure. I think that it's one of the few places I've seen where digital money has been more adopted than like places like out here.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, you can go to the little cart down the road and he'll have a QR code that you can scan and buy fruit from. So
right.
it's crazy.
It's amazing.
Yeah, India is a bit of a paradox that way, isn't it?
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, it seems like they're probably in the right direction, probably now. And maybe in probably a decade, things might change quite dramatically, which is always good. I kind of want to dial back now a bit to your professional practice, because you have such a solid base, I want to say, in detailing, because that's, sort of where you started. And now, because you're doing a lot of concept work, I'm interested to know what your sort of design workflow is. If, say, you get a project on your desk, Varsha, this is the brief, this is the site. We need a concept in, I'm going to be realistic and say 3 to 4 weeks time, and not like most clients. So like next week, please, next Tuesday. But no, let's say that you have a decent amount of time, right? It's a good brief. It's a good site. What's your workflow? Walk us through from when you start till you actually submit.
So if we have 3-4 weeks time, that's actually quite luxurious, I guess, in this kind of fast-paced world. So projects wherein there is a lot of time for research and it's never a solo process. I don't think it's always a collaborative effort, but there have been fun instances wherein I've gotten to cut up blocks and like start moving things around as a
You're talking about physical
models, like ways of exploring things. But even before we get into all this, the first thing that genuinely happens if you're talking step by step is research. Knowing who the client is, what they're looking for, the research into the site, into the place, what's coming up in this place, what the future has for, development of a place. For example, if you're ever doing something in Saudi, there's a lot of development over there that's happening. You kind of look into what the future could hold and, what you could aspirationally take this place to become. Because the client gives you a brief, but there's always ways that you can make the brief better with insights and really learning what something can provide. So I think the research part of it is pretty important, especially also seeing what the client from the client side has worked on before, what kind of projects they're used to, the kind of people they are, like, if they're very futuristic, if they like something that's a bit more traditional, all of these things really help create like a solid base. It gives, I think design has to be contextual. I mean, there are a lot of times, this is pretty obvious, but there are times when you can get to be, really experimental with stuff, but it's fun. Like even with contextual, it is, you still think about the future. So that, like, this is what I'm saying. It kind of ties into a lot of this kind of early research work that we do. So that's the first part. And then it's the fun part, which is like really getting to play with different ways of looking at this particular model or this particular idea. And personally, what I have really seen professionally where I work, what I've seen change over time is how collaborative people have gotten, because people have gotten better, have improved their relationships with each other. And there are times when we have literally, instead of sitting at desks, we are standing up and we move from computer to computer. And it's like 3 of us would work on one idea, and it feels like one shared supercomputer or one shared brain. Like, it's really interesting because all of us would have very specific talents. Like a coworker of mine, she's an incredible artist. Her work has been in the Louvre and stuff, so she provides this very outside kind of outlook on some stuff, out of the box thinking. And somebody else, another coworker of mine, she's had experience in a lot of different countries, and she has seen things that are like, a lot of your design ideas can sometimes be limited by your exposure to things that you've seen in your life. And the more you travel, the more places you've been, all of these things really help you think kind of differently. And then I have another coworker who reads heavy philosophy, and like he's deeply into like theory and books and things like that. So when we all share our ideas and our unique inputs into these things, and well, I guess from my perspective, what I provide to these things is that I get deep into the user. I genuinely really enjoy psychology. Like, my best friend in university was a psychologist. We've spent too much of time talking about these things. So I think the human experience, how people feel in spaces, all of these kind of things, all of these different collaborative units kind of come together and we move things forward. So physical models, drawings, charrettes, where we put stuff up and everyone contributes. It's nice because it doesn't feel like there's any particular hierarchy. It's just anyone who has a good idea can really, help move this forward. And having built such a nice team of people that, really thrive on this whole collaborative think tank kind of a thing has really helped with initial design work, because everyone's got like incredible experience. And that's how I think, really helps solidify these things. And then, obviously after that, we go into actually modeling it, 3D visuals, making it beautiful. One of the big things that we look at the place that I work, which is RMJM, is the storytelling aspect of it, which is a big part of how to really like sell an idea. You have the spaces, you have these things, but telling a story to the client, telling the right story to the client with all the research that you've done, with all the aspirations that you have, with all the different collaborative ideas that we've got, right? Putting that together, not just visually, but like with visual storytelling is the final step. We start from the start, honestly. Everything runs parallelly. We kind of, we started out like this, trying to think of what the big idea is and what the emotional outcome of this kind of storytelling is.
Right.
And that's kind of how we wrap up a concept with all these ideas and the collaboration and the end product.
I think anyone who's worked in a studio would know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It sounds like the way it should be.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, concept design should be done like that. I think, like you said, it needs to be very collaborative. I think more importantly, what I want fresh grads to understand is it's not a linear process.
Mm-hmm.
And not just fresh grads, I'm also calling out project managers, accountants, for example, who want to get an invoice out.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that is important. Projects need to be on schedule and so on. But concept design especially is not a very linear process. Production, detailed design might be a linear process because there's a very clear start and a very clear end. And you can sort of tangibly add more resource to get more done in that sense. But in a concept design, it's not as proportional and as rational as, people make it out to be. It is a very messy process. It is a lot of back and forth. It is a lot of starting from scratch and so on and so forth. I kind of want to bring Tisha in now and ask you as well. Is that what you think concept design should be?
It is, because I think, like you said, collaboration has to be at the root of concept design, because in the end, I think that's the beauty of architecture as well, is that you can bring in so many different perspectives and so many different types of like aspects into architecture, and there's always room for it. And concept design is that one stage where you can actually experiment. And if you don't, then automatically your design becomes very standard or just very plain, for lack of a better word. So I feel collaboration has to be kind of at the root of of it, simply because in the end, it has to be as unique, and that'll only happen when you have more diverse views kind of integrated into that process.
And also I think there has to be a level of risk that you take, because I think there's many projects which anyone listening, if you know design and if you look outside your window, I am sure you will see buildings which were probably just done because they had to get done, were probably done because a client wanted to move in or sell out at a certain point of time, projects which were done without particular care per se. And in my opinion, the worst projects which were just safe, which, they're efficient and they function and, all that stuff, but there's nothing particularly new that they're adding in any particular way. So I think that concept design is the absolute best time to be experimenting and trying out different things like that. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that that's how you do it.
Yeah.
So moving on, I then want to ask you about your project that probably over the time, I'm sure it's not that long, and I'm assuming there haven't been a big major list of projects. So I'm assuming up until this point, there's been one project which in your opinion stood out for you. I kind of want to touch upon it if we can. I hope there's no NDAs on it. And if there are, it's fine. You can leave them nameless. But the point of the question is, I want to know what of that project stood out for you and why.
So there is one project that stands out as something very different from anything that I worked on before. And it's not even something that even went forward per se too far, but it was a project in Libya.
Libya?
Yeah, Libya.
There's a word you don't hear very often.
Exactly. That was like a very interesting, the client was a very educated man from the place, but he had lived abroad and all that. And he wanted to bring like a master plan in, to his hometown. And the things that you Google about that place.
Was this, let me be the person to ask, but was this before the incident or after the incident?
What do you mean? What was before? Oh,
this project. Was it before or was it after? I'm trying to be as politically correct as I can be at the moment.
It was last year. So
definitely after.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Yeah. So it was interesting because there were a lot of chaotic things that were happening in that area.
Yeah,
obviously.
Very scary things, like the client did say, oh, people can show up in trucks with machine guns, and these are things that you should think about
that's a regular sight
when designing. So I think that was the funnest. Honestly, it feels quite strange working on something like that, but as a challenge, it was one of the funnest ones that I had encountered. And also, weirdly, I felt like some kind of altruistic person because we got to do something that would genuinely help save people's lives.
Yeah.
And you don't get to work on projects like that very often.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of things that you hope to actually do with your career, just as, like some way that you've actually genuinely helped humanity.
Yeah.
So that was interesting because one of the ideas that I came up with was creating a maze out of the place, like a labyrinth.
So that the people with the guns get lost?
Yes.
So that they can't find people?
So that with a staggered kind of, imagine a checkboard, but a checkboard that's on a curved arc. Right. You can never see beyond one house.
So you kind of have a grid system, but the grid
is on a curve.
It's kind of circular.
Yeah. It's on a curved grid.
Right.
So when you think of something like that, you don't go beyond one house or two houses. So just with concepts like that, like geometry and stuff, it was an idea that was, something that I thought would help by design.
True. By design, normally you want to do the opposite of that.
Yeah.
But I can see how, going the other way in that particular scenario, I can see how that would be pretty useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's quite cool. Yeah.
Well, there's something which I never thought about.
I know, exactly. That's amazing.
Interesting. Okay, awesome. I'm going to need a minute because I'm still thinking about guys showing up in machine guns.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about like bulletproof like compound walls and stuff like that,
One time when I was at my internship in another company, I was I was given just very few tasks. I was just working on the fire safety and, firewalls and stuff like that. But then I was walking past a coworker's desk and I see this paper for this project that they had done the research on. And this was like so long ago. I'm not sure which country. I want to say Baghdad, but I'm not sure where it was. But the research was on terrorist-proof buildings.
Wow.
Basically, how to create bomb-resistant buildings, like with placement, with materials, how to reduce, like, if something blows up, the damage it causes on the,
on the facade of the building.
that out. But like, it was interesting. I think maybe seeing that early on probably helped me come up with ideas like this for this particular.
Right. No, which again, you touch upon a bit of, this is a bit philosophical again, but it's interesting how I think architecture, maybe designers in general, I think design sort of feeds in from everywhere, right? Like you don't necessarily have to be, inspired in architecture by other architecture. You can be inspired by almost anything anywhere else, something which you've seen or heard before suddenly becomes the right answer for something which you're working on at the moment. I see that happen very often, which interestingly enough is a good segue to my next question, which is clearly if people have been listening thus far, and I'm pretty sure they have, you are someone who is not just an architect or not just inspired by architecture, clearly, right? So my question to you is for fresh grads coming up, right? They have architecture under their belt. They know how to design. They know how projects work, how they fit together, so on and so forth. But from your point of view, because you've been here now for X amount of years and you've been in practice for X amount of years, apart from architecture and design, what other skill do you think designers should have when entering the market here?
Well, that's tough question to answer because I don't think that there can be specific other skills that can be prescribed for every person. I genuinely think that it should come from the person themselves and their areas of interest. I say this purely because I know someone, like the kind of interest that I have, which I could say is I love movies and I've watched so many movies in my life. My thesis was even on film, So like that's what I explored in a very passionate way, which has really helped me with the whole storytelling aspect of what I do now. But not everybody I know someone who genuinely just does not like movies. You can't force someone to get into skills that are beyond their, But having said all that, there are some interesting things that I've noticed by learning or knowing other skills that you can actually bring into the design workforce. One of them is stand-up comedy.
Interesting.
One of them is stand-up comedy because I say this because a friend of mine is a comedian. And we constantly have our conversations as pun battles. And once upon a time,
my mind, I'm laughing already.
Yeah, no, so just long ago, he told me he's constantly just making jokes. So he says a joke to me, and I'm just like, that was come on, knowing you, I know you can do better than that. That was not that funny. And then he tells me, oh no, you can't say that to me. You have to be really supportive as a friend for a comedian because you have to go through so many bad jokes until you start making good jokes, right? And I know this is about comedy and stuff, but then taking that to heart, it helped me break apart perfectionism because I think a lot of people as designers, you want something to be the best almost immediately, like right off the bat when you start off. And this is something I've noticed working with everyone, you give out bad ideas and oh no, come on, that's not, that's not a great idea. But I say that you should go through bad ideas. I don't say execute them all the way, but I think you should think about them. You should talk about them. You should, at least it can at least be a point A until point A, B, C until you reach point, X, Y, Z, which is like the final thing. So iterations really help. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I genuinely learned from my friend who does comedy and me trying to embody that as a skill. Like, even if it's just with funny drawings and stuff like that, it just made me more open to the world. Like, I would look for jokes everywhere. And you make bad jokes, but eventually you get to good jokes. So that was another random skill that I've done research on it. And comedy, freestyle rapping, improv, they all require the same kind of mentality. You gotta go through, you can't be critical of yourself. You can't be critical of your work, whether you're a writer, you're a designer, you're whatever it is. And I think these kind of alternate skills really help you as a creative.
Right. Completely agree. It's interesting you brought up stand-up comedy because that's something which I feel quite passionate about.
Yeah.
For many reasons, because I think it was Dave Chappelle who said what Robin Williams said, which is stand-up comedy is probably the only artistic medium left where you can use everything you have ever learned. Period.
Yeah.
Anything that you have learned about anyone, anywhere can be used in that field. So as a designer for me, I find that quite interesting. Mm-hmm. Think about not just architecture and design, but think about every conversation you've met, every person you've met, literally every single moment you've been awake or even dreamt for that matter, can be used in your medium as That's compared true. To, what we do, which is we're still very much constrained and quite rigid when it comes to our creativity. Gravity, for example, is one of them. But it's one of the things that I love about that. And again, there's not a lot of fluff with stand-up, right? I mean, you don't have a backup band. You don't have an awesome audio guy making you sound really good on a podcast. But yeah, so to dial back a bit, I know that we've gone on a major arc at the moment. But as a designer, I think that, yes, there's a lot to learn from that. But I think more than your metaphor for good and bad jokes, I think from stand-up as a designer, I've learned things like stage presence. I've learned things like capturing an audience's enthusiasm, knowing when you're losing them, knowing how to bring them back, knowing, most importantly, when you just have them to kind of lay them with your main idea, right? Yeah. Because you could start off with, the absolute right thing to say, but then if they aren't really bought into you at that moment, they probably won't buy what you're talking about either. So there's a lot of things of that nature also, which I've learned or rather seen from stand-up. So I completely agree that yes, there are other venues, other avenues, creative avenues, which architects and designers can use for sure. Is there any other particular one that you have?
Filmmaking, honestly. Okay. Genuinely, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker as well. That's like been my ideal alternate life.
You're going to pull a Tom Ford one day. I'm sure you're going to pull a Tom Ford one day.
I like having my research during my thesis time in university was basically watch a million movies, go director by director, study works of art. And it's quite powerful because the medium of storytelling, right? Exactly how you said, it's about your audience. It's about capturing them. It's about knowing when you're going to lose them. And it's about you get really good at attention. I think you get really good at when you lose people's attention.
Right.
And I think that's an important skill to have as a designer. Even if you're just making presentations, these things are really, really important. You got to know when it's too long or too little, or like, okay, it can't ever be too little, but you know what I mean? Like it has to be a good blend of a lot of things.
Right.
And I actually have gotten to explore my filmmaking abilities in this profession quite a bit because like I make a lot of movies, using rendering software like Lumion and all of that. Movies with music and with script, with like having planned it all and, like really selling like ideas, getting your ideas through. I went for a comic book workshop the other day and like that was surprisingly very, very insightful to my architecture just because of like he talks about storytelling. And with comics, you have to be able to bring your viewer's eye from A, B, C, D. You got to go up across a page. Sometimes being very detail heavy, comics take a long time for you to get through one page. And sometimes if it's really light and minimal, it's really easy to flick through like multiple pages. So there was one magical thing that I learned about from comic books, which was he drew two boxes. Okay. And he said, you see the space here, and he circled a spot in between the two boxes. That's in between two panels. He's like, that's where the magic happens. He's like, people sometimes think to do too much, like, to really over explain stuff, but you underestimate the human imagination. People can fill that void with their imagination, and you don't genuinely need to tell everyone everything. And I think that is a really powerful like storytelling media tool that I learned from comic books, which that's what I'm saying. So there's like, I went there just because I really like digital art, and that's like a side hobby of mine, which has helped me stay creative and have some art which is my own.
Right.
Outside of the workplace, which is not driven by clients or like, it's just purely my own. And this comes back to the earliest question. It's hard to prescribe things to people because it has to be where your interests lie and what you want to do. But I do think that the biggest thing is the learning mindset. And like a friend of mine has said this, you never turn off. You're always thinking about like, how this can tie into some project, because everywhere I go, I walk around, I take pictures, I see things. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's kind of cool how this works. I mean, this is something you learn in architecture school, to start thinking like that.
Yeah.
Not turning off just while you're outside. It also applies to other skills. I think that everything can kind of be mixed and matched. And I think that's how you genuinely become more creative person, or, you genuinely get better ideas.
I also think we're kind of in a day and age where media and like narratives have become such an important part of anything, of how we perceive content and how we kind of approve of something. And so I can totally imagine how that can seep into architecture. And I actually remember a professor of mine saying that as soon as you like lose your curiosity, like you were saying, like really observing things around you, you no longer are an architect, because an architect's like core job is to find inspiration and kind of implement that in whatever you're working on. So as soon as you stop observing, you've kind of lost that very main thing that architects need to have to actually do their job. So yeah.
True. And I also think when it comes down to communication, anyone who's worked with me, and I'm pretty sure people listening will relate to this. It's interesting you brought up your comic book kind of, from one box to the other, because normally if I'm doing a concept design, or if I'm putting together a report or something like that, I actually sketch out little boxes wherein I actually kind of do a little,
thumbnails,
like a little thumbnail of what I expect that sheet to look like. And then I kind of go through that and I can automatically sort of tell, okay, this page is a bit too heavy, bit too many perspectives here, too much text here, spread it out a bit more. And this is before I've even gone to see what the actual content is. So I think that's very key. And I mean, I am guilty of reading a few comic books every now and then, admittedly, but I never put together until just now that maybe that's where I get that from, that being able to go from frame to frame to frame. That's maybe how I think at the moment. Mm-hmm. See, we put together new things every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much like you said, you have filmmaking in the background, sort of inspiring you with architecture. I clearly have this podcast going on. Tisha, do you got anything else going on that's inspiring you?
For me, it's illustration. I have been getting a lot. It's more of a side project that I've been just like working on as a skill, but looking into like typography more specifically and working with fonts and things like that is something that I'm very, very keen on. Graphic design, packaging, product packaging. Those are things that I do a lot of. I use my free time to kind of look around and see what, piques my interest.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, for listeners, if you are an architect and a designer and you are inspired by something which is not that, that's probably a good thing.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
You maybe want to even double down on that at the moment. And dialing us all back to reality, to this podcast. My final question to you, and I know you asked me about this question, but I left it open-ended just because I do. And for listeners who know, you will know exactly which question this is. This is the utopian question. The utopian question being, if tomorrow you get a client who comes to you and says, Varsha, I have an X amount of plot available in Dubai because I'm keeping it contextual. And here's my checkbook. Write down whatever you need. You have access to all the resources you may need, all the talent you may need, all the time, most importantly, that you may need. My only criteria for this project is that you be able to give back to the community in some way or the other, be it through something literal, be it through something philosophical, either way, but something which gives back to the community. What do you work on?
What comes to mind immediately, which is something that I talk about a lot outside of the workplace, I think is an individual as how they are, like basically your mental health. And I think that this is something that I've worked on quite a bit through my life. Like really, you don't talk about this professionally because you don't want to be seen as someone with anxiety or someone with, whatever it is. But having made so much of growth in my own personal life with learning how to deal with so many things makes me feel very passionate about this topic. And if I were to give back to community, design something that could do something like that, I would genuinely focus on human development. Like whether it's as a young person, as an old person, I don't want to say old person, as someone who is not that young, I guess.
Well, that's a good way of saying it.
Everyone has these things that they encounter in their life that kind of make it hard to deal with. And I think that creating a place that can help people come out of these things, I don't mean like a rehabilitation center or something like that. I mean, like, for example, I'll give you an example. I know some friend of mine, two friends of mine in India who have work in this startup. And the whole startup is about educating kids. But educating kids in an alternative way, giving them a wholesome, holistic education outside of the school, and the textbooks. Basically, one of them reached out to me because I was like big into film at that point. And he's like, do you have any significant movies that can help you learn certain key lessons, And I put together a list of different things. And this was something that he packaged to children, like as an educational thing, like learning things through movies and stuff like that. So I thought that was like a really a novel. I mean, I'm sure there are probably things, but at that point I was like, wow, this is so interesting that you would have a company that, helped kids like learn in different ways. And that's what I mean. Like, so if I were to have a site and a plot that can really like enrich people's lives by letting them really grow in their own ways, in different ways, so that would be something that I would be interested in just genuinely making.
So what you're talking about, if I were to kind of I'm trying to in my mind sort of compartmentalize it, but I feel like it's not. It feels like this is an overlap of, trauma center, rehab, residential living, maybe even hospitality in there a bit, a lot of user experience. Yeah, it's very.
But you're missing one key thing, which is inspiration.
Inspiration, of course. I mean, that's a given. But yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, I can't even. I understand what you're saying, but I can't even sort of label that, which is interesting. Which means clearly it's not been done. Probably. What do you think?
Definitely not here, at least. I've seen forms in terms of like having community centers that focus on, like providing workshops that are dedicated towards like mental health and looking at human development and things like that, but not something on a large scale that I've seen or heard of.
I mean, I guess if I were to kind of clarify what I would do over there, and bringing the whole idea of inspiration is because I think inspiration is kind of like medicine, reminding yourself to be in awe, even if you're in a horrible place or if your life is really stuck in a certain way. If you bring awe back into your life, there's just a lot of magic there. I mean, I know it sounds like a thing, but if I could create a space that could genuinely make people feel inspired, I think that pulls people out of a lot of things. And there's a lot of hope there. There's a lot of, it can optimistically maybe even give people, faith or optimism. When I say faith, I mean like optimism, So if I were to rework that, it would be something playful. It would be something that surprises you. It would be something that changes and shifts and, like gets really experimental and like gives you like a lot of awe. Right. I think that is something that can actually impact any community. It can genuinely like really help a place. I think if I had like a lot of money and like thing, that would be something that I think.
So it's not necessarily in terms of like programming specifically, but it's purely the design is what you're talking about.
It's purely the feelings you feel.
Exactly.
And the things it can evoke.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm already thinking of some visuals in my head.
Yeah.
No, but that's really cool though. And I think you touched upon a very relevant topic, more so now, given that we live in pandemic times. Mm-hmm. Things like anxiety, especially, I'm sure for most designers is a very, very real thing that they deal with now. So yeah, probably something which definitely does need to be done. Again, I'm still not very sure as to what exactly it looks like or what it is, but maybe that's exactly what it is at the moment, right? Like it still needs to be sort of fleshed out and thought through, and definitely requires a lot of research, a lot of psychology, even I would think that goes into.
I know there's a lot of research that's being done on like sensory architecture and looking at how, you kind of embrace all your five senses in terms of how people actually respond to a particular environment. And a lot of psychologists are involved in that as well. So it's kind of cool. Especially, I think there's been a lot of particular research for primary schools and figuring out how architecture can really help enhance that learning environment and space in which kids are. So there's a lot of cool things happening at the moment.
Yeah, man. Varsha, this was super cool.
Thank you. This was very fun.
I think, I don't know about anyone, but me for sure, I'm definitely quite inspired at the moment. I feel like I want to grab a sketchbook and start sketching some stuff.
Yep.
And that clearly means that somebody else also wants to do the same. So thank you so much for inspiring us. And this is definitely not going to be the last episode that we do, for sure. There's definitely going to be a lot more. So on behalf of the A-Form team, I would like to thank you once again for coming on. And
thank you for having me. Yeah.
On that note, we will catch you guys next week. Fellow A-Formers, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being part of our journey, and thank you for the immense support we've been receiving for our episodes. It has and continues to be a very bumpy road, but we wouldn't want it any other way. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought you value, please share this episode with anyone who may benefit from it. But of course, if you loved the episode, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, send us a little DM, and we may just send you a secret link to a secret episode which we've been working on. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See you next time. Keep sketching.